7 o'clock. Before I go to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. I believe we've had a number of absences. Apologies.
Yes, Chair, we have 4 apologies. Councillor Hartstein, Councillor Rigby, Councillor Snell and Councillor Fandy.
Thank you. And 2, could we approve the correct minutes of the last committee, or licensing committee, held on the 27th of July 2023 as being correct? Councillor Raper.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a concern. On the section restricted private hire driver's licences, number 5, the certain concerns were expressed by myself and at least 2 other members of the committee, and they don't appear in the minutes. So it appears as though it was just accepted by everyone, where we had, although it was passed, we did express concerns, and I would have liked to have seen them in here. It was to do with the safeguarding training that was not expected to happen straight away. They were given a window of opportunity. They didn't actually get an accreditation or pass, and somebody, an unknown somebody, would be checking that it had been taken. So I just felt that should have been included in the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Raper. It is recorded that yourself, Councillor Hartstein and Councillor Rigby abstained.
Yes, but it doesn't
so we need
say why.
Yeah, but we need the explanation as to why. Could we put Democratic Services to the amendment, get working on that amendment? Thank you.
Thank you.
Items of urgent business. Do I have any items of urgent business, please? Any items of urgent business?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Any declaration of interest? No. Now we come to the main and only part on the agenda of business, is the setting of licence fees. And I'm quite happy to take any questions. Before we start, though, you may well have noticed that pages, I think it's 15 and 17, were quite minute. So before we start any questions, I'd just like to ask the licensing officer to explain what these actually mean. Could you do that for us, please, sir?
Yes, sorry, certainly, Chair. So the 2 appendices within your report, I'm just trying to find the page number on my electronic copy. So page 17. Effectively, page 17 is the data behind the calculation of the fees. It lists in each of the columns, so on the left-hand side, the items that are in black are expenditures, things that are in red are income-based. And what it does, it proportions the costs of each of the areas, things like the salary at the beginning, it proportions it out across against all of the different licensing areas, so private hire driver vehicles, etc., etc. So on the left column, you can see expense, that is the total expense to the budget code, and then we portion it out across the various aspects of licensing based on the percentage of time that we spend on that type of activity across the whole team, and the different percentages are right at the top below that. It then moves down, and so the income shown there, so the income is shown against the correct licensed areas, which then feeds it into the sheet, the other separate sheet that you have there, which is basically showing you the income and the expenditure, and then it shows the rolling surplus and deficit on those trading accounts.
Right, does anyone have any questions? Councillor Raper, please.
I'd just like to add a comment about that. I mean, I actually had to use a magnifying glass to read this, which is unnecessary, or it should be. And you're talking about things being rag rated or in red and whatever. but the copy we're given is black and white. So although we've got it this evening, you know, it's literally as we've walked into the meeting. So I wonder, could we in future ask that things that are sent out are actually readable? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ray, but we have discussed this, and we've actually asked for this over the last 2 years. So I'll come back to the legibility of these documents at the end of our question and our answers. Does anyone else have any questions on the figures, please? Councillor Green?
Thank you, Chair. On the figures, it says that we are spending £31,688 on agency and £4,261 on overtime. Looking at that, would you say we need to employ extra staff? And if we did employ extra staff, would that bring that cost down?
The agency for that period was actually maternity cover, so we had to get agency staff in to cover what was a vacancy. The overtime is there because we do carry out out-of-hours enforcement checks around the pubs and the clubs on unsociable hours. Probably don't see there's a need to employ additional staff to specifically do that, but it is essential that we have a small overtime budget to be able to pay staff to do additional hours to go and check licences when they're being utilised.
Councillor Green, like to ask a follow-up?
With that in mind, okay, fine about the overtime. Regard the agency fee, was that one person? And if we know somebody's going to go out on maternity leave, that we know they're going to be potentially 12 months, would have it been worth to actually employ someone for that 12-month period?
There is the possibility to employ somebody for a short-term contract. My experience is generally struggle to recruit experienced licensing staff. Sometimes it is easier to try and obtain those through agencies, etc. But yeah, I mean, we can look at employing, you know, on a short-term contract. I know from working in other authorities where I've tried to do that in some of the shared managed services that we're responsible for, it is difficult to try and recruit licensing staff even on a short-term basis. But you know, we can try, but generally I think the only option for us available is the sort of the consultancy services that have got people that are available that are, you know, experienced in licensing.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Raver?
Thank you. I seem to be saying a lot this evening. Just a question, really, of something I didn't understand. On page 21, public protection licences, the second point down, can you explain what false means in the change from last increase? 21. I just didn't understand what it meant.
It's gone from 80 to 85.
Sorry?
Just saying the figure's gone from 80 last year to 85 this year.
Yeah, and it's got the percentage increase, but I can't understand I don't know what false means. Oh, fair enough. Yeah, and the percentage is right, but so thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Nardi?
Thank you very much, Chair. Still on page 21. I'm just looking at the percentage increase and public protection license and order, which is number 3 from the bottom there, is 8.33% increase, while the rest are either 6.6% plus or 5% plus. I'm just wondering, why is this higher than others? And is there any particular reason?
Does it depend on the starting amount?
Just a minute, Councillor Raver. On Archie?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just one more. And also, looking at the charges that has been reviewed, I know there's so many licensing items here. How did you determine which services are to be reviewed?
So it's in relation to the calculations in the other spreadsheet, and predominantly the one here before you. What it's saying is where there is a deficit, and it's a growing deficit, so we're not making as much money as we need to cover the cost of providing the service, that's where we've looked to increase the fee. Areas like the taxi fees and charges, we haven't chosen to increase those fees at this time because although there is a small deficit on some of the accounts, we are bringing in slightly more than it's costing us to provide the service in some occasions. So we've looked at each section independently. Where it's costing us more to provide the service than we're getting in on income, we have pushed it up. The spread, the information, some licenses are 5-year licenses, so we would only get income in once every 5 years. Some licenses are 3-year licenses, so we only get income in once every 3 years in relation to those licenses. So we have to bear in mind that there will be sort of peaks and troughs as the years move forward, etc. So we've tried to take that into account. That's one of the reasons why we haven't changed the taxi fees this year. We changed them last year. We'll see what happens in another year or two once we've had a couple more years of varying lengths of fees in.
Thank you very much. Just share one more question. So if the deficit did not balance in the next 3 years or 2 years, does it still mean you have to increase that same service again?
It will do, yes. So if the deficit is growing, yes, we will look to increase the fees. But something that we monitor, we normally look to increase the fees across the board sort of every 3 years. But last year we did increase all the fees. This year we're increasing the majority of the fees because the costs are going up considerably, so it's to try and balance that out. The taxi and private hire side of things, as I say, we will keep that under review. Maybe we'll look to increase those next year. The deficits, we're talking, you know, hundreds or thousands of pounds difference. We're not talking tens of thousands of pounds difference. So we will keep that under review and see how we go. It all depends on the number of applications. If we suddenly get a surge of applications, additional licenses that come on board, obviously that means more income. Our expenditure generally doesn't go up because most of our expenditure is in staff and infrastructure. So there are so many variables in relation to this, but this is sort of a way that we can calculate and justify to our best endeavours, you know, what it costs us to provide the service.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Adam.
Well, thank you, Councillor Largie. Councillor Raby, you wish to say something?
Yes, I was just going to say, when you were talking about why there were different amounts, if the starting point is smaller, surely the £5 percentage would be greater, which is why they're not all the same. So some of the others are a bit round up error, as it were. But isn't that the reason? £5 out of 60 is a greater percentage than £5 out of 90. It was just a point of clarification, that was all, because it is.
Yes, no, yeah, agree.
Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of clarify where we are on the agenda, because I thought you started by asking the licensed officer to clarify this spreadsheet, which is fine, but we seem to have jumped to all the different appendices before we've actually taken the report. Normally we take the report, then move on to... I have got questions, but are we at that stage now, or are we going to take the report first? Because I thought you were only talking about this paper that's been circulated tonight. We've jumped to the others, and I have got questions, but if we can have the report first, I'll wait till we've heard the report. Does that make sense?
Yep. Councillor Maney, thank you. We'll go to the report in a moment. was something that we were discussing earlier. So I moved along the agenda along, so I beg your pardon. Can I have your report now, Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to add, obviously, you have the report in front of you. So this is our annual review of the licensing fees, and this will set the fees for the 2023-2024 period coming to effect on the 1st of April. Licensing fees generally are set in one of three ways. They're either set by statute, capped by statute, or we can set them locally. Fees set locally shouldn't make any sort of profit. If you do make profit, you should carry that profit forward and offset future years in relation to what it costs to provide. So what we've done here is to try and provide the information, the data about the income against what the expenditure is for licensing, and we've broken that cost down in proportion to the amount of time that we spend on each of those activities. As I say, the proposal before you is in Appendix 3, I believe. Sorry, no, Appendix 2. As I say, most of the costs have been increased around the sort of 6% mark, give or take a small amount. And with the exception of the taxi fees, as I say, we did increase the taxi fees last year. The margins are so slight that we didn't feel increasing them now was the right thing to do. Certainly with the pressure on particularly on the taxi trade at the moment. And we can keep that under review as we do every year, and we can make any adjustments that we do. If we do make a deficit in a year, we can carry that deficit forward and recover it in later years. So, you know, if we don't necessarily balance the books exactly today, we can do that this time next year. We can say, okay, the deficit is growing. We definitely need to increase the fees around taxes. I think that's probably all I need to say. Other than for this year, we did also include a benchmarking of some fees from some Essex authorities in sort of the local area. The only caveat I would say with regards to benchmarking, you know, that's the fee that they charge. They justify the fee by the way they construct their fee. It doesn't take into account the size of their licensing service, the number of licenses that they issue. We haven't got that data. All it's showing you is what we're actually charging. It's a good gauge to see whether we're in the right area, but there is definitely guidance around fee setting for licenses to say you shouldn't set your fees just on seeing what other people charge and charging the same in relation to that. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Maney, would you like to ask your questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to, it's in the agenda, sort of, it's in relation to the table here that's been circulated. It seems quite straightforward, so I almost feel it's silly asking this question, but just so I'm sure, the very last column under surplus deficit, there's some really, if I'm reading this right, there seems to be some really huge surpluses there. I don't know what LA03 is or GA05, but if I'm reading it as it appears here, whatever LA03 is, we've got nearly a £250,000 surplus.
LA 2003 is Licensing Act 2003. That deals with all the premises, alcohol and entertainment licensing. That's actually a deficit. It's not a surplus. I'm just having a quick look. So the negative figures on the spreadsheet are surpluses, and the positive figures are deficits for that. Licensing 2003 fees are statutory set, and over the years it's costing us more to administer the service than we actually gain from the fees set by government.
Yeah, Councillor Maney.
So where we see a minus, that's actually a positive, and all the rest are deficits.
Correct.
There really are some, I mean, first of all, that isn't very clear, but there's some colossal deficit. If you add up all those deficits, I mean, that comes to a huge amount, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, across the years, yes, it does. I mean, it does cost us, particularly with the Licensing Act 2003, more money than we get in through fees. There has been proposals that they'll allow locally set fees in the Licensing Act for a number of years now, but we haven't seen that come forward. And I think certainly if we were able to set fees locally, the fees would be set higher than currently provided by government. As an example, a temporary event notice costs us, they pay £21 to submit a temporary event notice. If that notice then has to come all the way through to committee to be decided upon, that's definitely costing more than £21. It costs more than £21 in the officer time just to process it. But that's the fee that's set for temporary event notices.
Any more questions, Councillor Maney?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Green?
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Maney on this spreadsheet, we have a deficit of £32,135.34 for animal establishments. While we are not the most expensive in local authorities, compared to local authorities around us, how are the other local authorities managing to keep it lower than us and not be in a deficit?
I think the thing to say is I don't know whether the other local authorities are in a deficit or not. All I've reported on in the benchmarking is what they charge for their licence fee. I've got no data, and that's what I was trying to sort of highlight with the benchmarking side of things, that it doesn't tell us whether they're running at a profit or a loss, whether they have more staff or less staff. It may be that some of those authorities have, hundreds of applications for animal licences, as opposed to, a handful of, not more than a handful, but a smaller number that we would have. I think, for us, we need to be able to justify what our fees are, and we have been challenged by the trade representatives, certainly from the taxi trade, to sort of say, well, are we getting value for money? Are you, historically this is, are you, making a profit out of taxi licensing? With the system that we've developed, and we've had this system for a number of years, we can, demonstrate to the trade where we get the money in, and how we spend it, and that we're not making a profit out of it. Some authorities across the country have, made money and subsidised other areas of the council, and have been forced to pay back money to the trade. With the system we have, and the way it's looked at, we can clearly justify our income against expenditure, and justify the fee that we charge. So, but whereas with the benchmarking, I haven't got the data behind that. All I've got is what they charge. It's a good gauge as to, are we in the same figure? If we was charging £1,000 for a licence and everyone else was charging £50 for the licence, we'd say to ourselves, well, why are we so expensive? Conversely, if it was the other way around, if we were really, really cheap and everybody else was charging a lot for a licence, we could ask the questions, why are we so cheap? Why aren't we, in relation to that? But I'm confident with the figures that we've got and the fees that we're charging, we can justify those fees, and they are on, as much of a cost recovery basis that we can do. We have to keep that in checks and balances. Can't suddenly put the costs up massively around the animal establishments, because a lot of those are very small businesses that I think, would be a detrimental effect for that business if we was to suddenly increase them by hundreds of percent.
Councillor Shinnick?
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 25, you've got the gambling licences. There's no increase there at all. And also on the alcohol and entertainment fees.
So the gambling licences are capped by legislation, and we are at the maximum that we can charge for that. And then the Licensing Act 2003 are set by statute, so we can't charge any more in relation to that. That's why we're unable to increase the fees in that area. For the alcohol and entertainment, yeah, that's correct.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Your previous answer, you brought up small businesses and animal shops. I'm actually was going to bring that up this evening, that a local pet shop in Grays, Trop Shop, has to close at the end of the month due to hiring costs. What can we do? I know there's not much we can do. With these figures, there's probably nothing we can do. But at the moment, are you concerned that we can end up losing small businesses like Trop Shop across the borough?
This is to do with licensing fees, so that's a little bit too general, I'm afraid. Just specifically licensing fees.
I mean, I'm happy to, because there is a fee that relates to pet shops. I think that what Councillor Green is getting at. I think, you know, all businesses, particularly the smaller businesses, are all struggling, you know, in the current climate. I think when you look at the costs of a pet shop, particularly somewhere like Trop Shop, where they've got lots of heaters and water heaters, the electric bill must be significant for them. I wasn't aware of anything in relation to Trop Shop, but the actual cost, if you spread that out across weeks and months, it's not a massive expense to that small business. And you know, some of those licenses can last up to 3 years if they're a good premises. If they're a 5-star rated premises, it's the same fee for 3 years as opposed to if they were a lesser rated premises, which they pay the same fee every year. For those inspections, we have to go down, we have to do a detailed inspection for a pet shop particularly. We have to be qualified as an animal inspector to do that, so there's considerable training costs and training time for that. We also have to do at least one mid-term inspection on that premises. So the actual cost of providing that inspection is significant. But when you look at the cost of a licence over the period that their licence is for, it's not a significant cost. And I don't think if we was to speak to the individual businesses, the make or break for them, obviously any cost is an additional burden to them, and any increase in cost is an additional burden. But I don't think that would be the cause of you know, business failure just because of the cost of the licence. They're not, you know, exorbitant amounts of money they're paying for could be a 3-year licence.
Okay, Councillor Rayburn.
Thanks, Chair. I may have misunderstood something you said earlier, but just could you explain the different licensing regimes? Who decides which one of those we follow? Is it chosen locally, or is there an expectation for certain things that have statutory limits?
So the legislation that provides the framework for licensing, it allows in certain aspects things like taxi licensing, street trading licensing, sex establishments. Within the legislation it says we can set a fee locally. Things like the Licensing Act 2003, which governs alcohol and entertainment predominantly, within the legislation, within the regulations, it sets out how much we charge for each thing. The gambling legislation sets a cap on the maximum we can charge up to. And so we do charge up to the maximum, so we charge as much as we can to recover the cost of doing it.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question in relation to private hire operators licenses on page 35. It seems that the bigger the fleet of vehicle, the more the disparity between what the charge that we levy and the average becomes. So, for example, if you take a private hire operator's licence for 21 vehicles or over 5 years, it's over £5,000 compared to an average of £2,024 compared to the other authorities that you've chosen. One of the things we hear quite a lot of is that there's a shortage of drivers in Thurrock, and it's becoming harder to basically run a taxi firm, to put it bluntly. With figures like that and disparities like that, are we at risk of perhaps tempting operators to simply shift their operation to another borough? I
mean, certainly my experience is that operators won't necessarily go where it's the cheapest to get licensed. They will gravitate to where it's the easiest to get licensed. And I think nationally, if you look at the moment, Wolverhampton Council have thousands and thousands and thousands of licensed drivers, vehicles and operators, hardly any of which are based and operate within Wolverhampton because they don't have any knowledge test, any, you know, so the bar to become a licensed driver is much, much lower at Wolverhampton Borough Council. I don't think necessarily cost is the main driver for it. As I say, it is really the ease of obtaining a licence. I think things like the operator licences, you know, those figures are based over a 5-year licence, and I think, you know, the amount of work that we have to put into a larger operator in, you know, checking their records, the number of complaints we receive, you know, it's also things that now about checking the staff that they've got, have gone through all the DBS checking, etc., is obviously much higher for a larger operator compared to a single operator. Hence why there's a sort of sliding scale on that. So we do spend more time on the larger operators than we do on the smaller operators.
Councillor Maney, do you want to do a follow-up question?
Yeah, I don't want to labour the point, Chair, and I hear what the officer says. It just, but you know, that figure there, over £5,000 for a licence for an operator with 21 vehicles or more. Yet, if we compare it to Southend, which is a unitary, it's 1,200. I mean, they have to do the same checks as us. I mean, the Southend has a much larger nighttime economy. I should think that they have to do considerably more checks. It's perhaps not one for here. It's just that's really a massively stark difference in what we charge compared to neighbouring local authorities. And I think it's just something to keep an eye on, because I think if those costs continue to escalate, we will run the risk where simply it's easier for operators to up sticks and move to a nearby borough. And as I said, from people I hear, from people who rely on taxis, all I hear is that they find it harder to book a taxi nowadays, and operators are saying that they find it harder and harder to recruit drivers. Yet if those costs continue to escalate, I mean, it just surely just tempts them to think, should I move my business to Brentwood or Basildon or Southend? So as I say, I think the question's been answered, but I do think they're charges we need to keep an eye on, and in future years, I think, you know, you can't have that disparity in cost, because I think it will begin to harm the trade here.
Thank you, Councillor Maney. Any more questions? Councillor Onaji.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, I just want more clarity on 2.1. It did say different licensing regimes have different ways in which the fees are set. I know, having given that there is a statutory set fee, locally set fee, and also locally set fee, which is capped at maximum. What do you mean by different licensing regime?
So, you know, licensing regime, what I'm talking about there are the different types of licenses. So the taxi licensing regime is dealt with by a number of pieces of legislation. Alcohol and entertainment is dealt with by the Licensing Act 2003. Street trading, sex establishments are dealt with under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. So that's what I mean by the different regimes, or the different areas of licensing.
Thank you, Chair. Answered.
Councillor Green, did I see you waving your hand?
Yes, Chair, thank you. As we've previously said, we have high amounts of deficit. What can we do to see this deficit down and get this lower?
I mean, certainly in the areas where it's a statutory set fee, like the Licensing Act 2003, we would be reliant on government, you know, allowing locally set fees to come forward. And say it's something that has been mooted lots previously, but it hasn't happened as of yet. Certainly, the increase in the fees will obviously help reduce any of the deficits. And actually more licences, if more people come forward and get licensed within the borough, as you know, if the taxi trade grows, if you know, as redevelopment and things happen across the borough, and you know, the need for sort of taxis, you know, grows, then the more licences we have, that's the more income our actual costs don't particularly change much with additional licences. So if we had another 100 taxi drivers, come up, we wouldn't necessarily need another member of staff to deal with that. That would just increase the amount of income for that area. It could be dealt with the resources we have. There is a small amount of cost in producing the licences and the bits of paper and the bits of plastic that go out. But, so either increasing the number of licences that we issue, or being allowed to increase the fees in those areas where we have got, a deficit on those, would assist with that.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Going on from that point about the costs of the licences for taxi hires, you're saying that to keep the costs down, the best thing was more people to apply for a licence. But then on the table here, with what Councillor Maney was saying about the, more than 21 vehicles for 5 years, it's over £5,000 for a licence. Is there anything else we can, how are we, if people want to come here, it's a big expenditure in relation to other boroughs. So do we know what they're doing so that because their licence is a lot, their fees seem to be a lot lower, unless I've misunderstood. I'm just wondering how because if it was cheaper if more people apply, but looking at that, they might think it's so expensive, I can't apply because it's too expensive for them. Does that make sense?
And I think, and as I say, the benchmarking figure I haven't got, and there isn't any data that is available to say the number of licences they issue, the number of staff that they have employed to provide the service for operators. I don't know what level of enforcement action they do in relation to operators, whether they go out and do any checks on their operators. I would hazard a guess that an area like Southend, because it has a busy, nighttime economy, there's a tourist attraction there, they probably have more operators of taxis than we do in Thurrock. The cost of having a licensing officer and a licensing system for us and Southend, I would imagine, is fairly similar. But if you divide that cost of providing that service by more licences, as I would assume Southend has, then obviously the cost of each licence will be less because you're dividing the cost between more people, effectively, more licences. So without looking at, my guess is that, because Southend have more operators, they have more taxis than us. So they spread the cost amongst a wider pool of licences that they issue. Whereas at Thurrock, we have less operators and less taxi drivers and less vehicles than other boroughs do. So I think that's why there is a difference.
Sorry, Chair. It does seem a large difference, and obviously we want to, like we're saying, we have got lots of deficits here that are getting quite large, and we need to sort of try and make sure that the services that we offer, we're getting the best value we can, and we're looking at innovative ways of delivering those services so that we can keep the costs down, so that we can encourage more people to apply for licences.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. I just want to point out, because, it does seem rather different to put profits as red and show it, but there's a tiny scale here, down here at the bottom right, where it actually says that surplus is in red and debit is in black, which isn't really helpful down there. I would agree with you that the standard accounting practices would be red is negative and black is positive. I just want to, before we actually go to the recommendation to agree for the proposed fees and charges as set out in Appendix 2 for 2024 and 2025 financial year, is would you be happy to agree this based on a spreadsheet you can't really read, because we are actually in our rights to send it back and asked for a better and more coherent and more, say, accounting standard-wise report. Hands up would like to send the report back and make sure it's more legible and coherent, please. Go on, Councillor King. Okay. I'll take that. And against? Abstain. Okay. Okay. So, bearing that in mind, we cannot agree for the proposed fees and charges set out on Appendix 2 for the 2024-25 financial year. Democratic Services will need to revise that wording so that we can actually have a spreadsheet we can actually read and understand. And it's using more standard accounting practices, like using negative figures to show deficits and positive figures to show positive. Can we do that? All those in favour? And we could put the motion down so we can read it. And that's, can you put a motion together? Is that? We need a motion. Is that, are we all happy with that motion or the wording of that motion? Councillor Maney?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure the legal advisor can. I think we don't need a motion. You're just saying you can't agree the recommendation. We're not comfortable agreeing the proposed fees and charges because you don't think there's enough information. So I don't, unless I'm wrong, I don't think we need to propose something. We're just not agreeing it. We don't agree it.
Well, we're finding it very difficult.
In order to pass that, we have to do it at some stage because it's the licensing committee that set the fees and charges. We're legally required to do it, so we will have to do it at some stage. But I think what you're saying is, for now, the information isn't sufficient for the committee to agree that recommendation. So the answer is no, we don't agree it. And officers then come back with information that satisfies us. I don't think we need a counter recommendation or motion. We just don't agree them.
Yeah, I was just making the point that for the last 2 years we've been asking for more legible reports. This is the third time I've had to look at these things under a microscope and figure out what they're saying. I was told by one of the BVI officers, if you're not satisfied with this report, you send it back. You're perfectly within your rights to. So,
fair point.
in order to show while we may not necessarily disagree with the proposed charges set out in Appendix 2, I do think we should be shown a bit of respect and have something, because something that is more legible. Could the licensing officer, you want to say, Paul?
No, I just wanted to confirm, I don't think, thinking about timescales, etc., we haven't got another licensing committee scheduled until February. So we'll probably mean we'll have to convene another licensing committee in December to bring the report back with them printed bigger for you. I just wanted to just clarify with them services, because obviously they need to also then feed into the full list of fees and charges that then get published.
Apologies, just checking calendar now.
Councillor Raper?
Can I just say, can Dem Services try and check that there aren't too many clashes? Because I know some of the apologies tonight are because people are in a meeting in the room across there.
Yeah, we'll try and take that into account, thank you. I'm trying to make is that we've been here three years, all the time I've actually come to licensing committees and nothing ever gets done. And until you push back, nothing ever will get done.
Chair, I believe this is the last of the licence committee this municipal year.
Have an extraordinary one, would we not?
I'll make a note.
Yeah, so we can arrange one of those. Okay, then would we agree then to delay our agreement for the proposed fees and charges as set out in Appendix 2 for 24-25 financial year until we get a more coherent spreadsheet and breakdown where we actually show debits as red, and negative and positives as positives and in black. Is that all right? Can I have a hands up, please? Thank you very much. Kent.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to say, can we, for the members of the committee, we did have a little chat before the meeting started about the layout, because although the big document here is on a free paper, it's still nowhere near big enough. So not only with the deficit of the red and black being the opposite to what it is normally when you get your, for instance, you get your bank statements, to make it easier, because not a lot of councillors, we're not financial wizards, unfortunately. Some may be, but I'm not. To make it easier, so we make sure that everyone actually does understand exactly what the fees and charges are, the increases and the deficits and the surpluses, and make sure that it is, even if it ends up being on more than one paper or the one page, so that we can actually see and so that we can actually understand exactly what's going on. Please.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
Chair,
certainly
to
I can, yeah, make sure it is printed in a much bigger format in relation to that. There obviously is a key on there which, you know, you can't see as well because it is as small as everything else. It's not my spreadsheet. I have to go back to the people who own the spreadsheet to say, can they reverse it? You know, it's beyond my Excel capabilities, but I'm sure the people that produce that can take that on board and do that. If they can't, I can come back with the reasons as to why they were unable to do it.
I'd like to make an apology on behalf of our licensing officer, because he did tell us right at the beginning, before the meeting, that this wasn't his spreadsheet. He gets dumped on with it. So please don't think any bad feelings towards our licensing officer. He's as much a victim of this as us. Thank you. So moving on, and that should, unless there's any other business. And I'll declare this meeting closed at 19:47. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.